At 0630 on March 1st, 1943, Major Ed Larner stood on the rain-soaked coral runway at Port Moresby, watching ground crews prepare his B-25 Mitchell bomber for what higher command had already dismissed as a suicide mission. The tropical dawn hung heavy with moisture, turning the air into a suffocating blanket that clung to everything: uniforms, aircraft skin, the letter from his wife tucked in his breast pocket. 31 years old, with 72 combat missions behind him and not a single ship to show for it, Larner understood the mathematics of failure better than most. For 8 months, American bombers had been hunting Japanese convoys across the Southwest Pacific, climbing to 10,000 feet, releasing their bombs and watching them explode harmlessly in empty ocean while enemy ships sailed on unscathed. The hit rate hovered around 3%, a number that meant dead air crews for no strategic gain. Now, Japanese intelligence had detected something that demanded immediate action. 8 troop transports and 8 destroyers had departed Rabaul, carrying nearly 7,000 soldiers of the 51st Division to reinforce the garrison at Lai. Every soldier who reached that destination meant another month of bloody jungle fighting, another 1,000 American casualties trying to dig them out of prepared positions. The problem was physics. A bomb dropped from 10,000 feet took 37 seconds to reach the water. In that time, a destroyer at flank speed could travel 380 yards, more than 3 football fields. Japanese captains had learned to watch for the bomb release, calculate the trajectory, and simply steer their ships away from the impact point. It was almost leisurely, this dance of altitude and evasion. The mad idea. General George Kenney, commanding 5th Air Force, had proposed something that made every experienced pilot's blood run cold. Skip the bombs across the water like flat stones, flying in at 50 feet, releasing at 300 yards with a 5-second delay fuse. The bomb would bounce once or twice, then slam into the ship's hull at the waterline, the most vulnerable point on any vessel. The theorists loved it. The pilots who would have to execute it saw only suicide. Flying a twin-engine bomber straight at a warship bristling with anti-aircraft guns, maintaining a steady course while every weapon on that ship tried to blow you out of the sky. It violated every survival instinct they'd developed. Japanese destroyers carried 127mm main guns, forests of 25mm cannons, and countless machine guns. All of them could track a bomber at wave-top height. One solid hit to an engine at that altitude meant cartwheeling into the ocean before anyone could react. There would be no time for parachutes, no chance for water landings, just impact and oblivion. Higher command had forbidden the tactic twice already. Too dangerous, too experimental, too likely to get entire squadrons killed for minimal gain. But Larner had watched traditional bombing fail mission after mission. He'd seen friends die trying to hit ships from altitude, while Japanese gunners had all day to bracket their formations with flak. Now, standing in the pre-dawn darkness with 9 B-25s warming up behind him, he was about to bet everything on Kenney's mad idea. The preparation, the modification of the B-25s had been done in secret. 5th Air Force mechanics, working under Kenney's direct orders, had transformed the medium bombers into something unprecedented. They'd ripped out the bombardier's position in the nose and installed 850 caliber machine guns pointing forward, 4 in the nose, 4 in fuselage blisters. The Standard bomber had become a flying battleship, capable of putting 200 rounds per second downrange. The theory was elegant in its brutality. Suppress the ship's anti-aircraft guns during the approach. Make the Japanese gunners choose between firing back and taking cover. Turn the bomber into something that could fight its way to the target rather than simply enduring defensive fire. Practice runs had been conducted in secret using the SS Pruth, a 4,700-ton steamer that had run aground on a reef near Port Moresby in 1924. The rusting hulk, half submerged and going nowhere, made a perfect target. Larner's crews had flown dozens of runs at dawn and dusk, learning the precise combination of altitude, speed, and release point that would make the bomb skip properly. Lieutenant Jake Fawcett had learned the hard way what happened when you got it wrong. Coming in too high at 70 feet, his practice bomb had skipped clean over the target and exploded 300 yards beyond. Too low at 30 feet, and the bomb would submarine into the water. Too fast, and it would shatter on impact. Too slow, and it would sink without skipping. The sweet spot was terrifyingly precise. 50 feet altitude, 270 miles per hour, release at 300 yards, bomb trajectory angle of 8 degrees. Miss any variable, and you'd waste your bomb, assuming you survived the approach. The mission begins. By 0745, Larner was airborne, leading 9 B-25s in loose formation. They stayed low, barely 30 feet above the water, low enough that salt spray occasionally spattered the windscreens. Japanese radar couldn't track aircraft below 100 feet, and surprise would be their only real advantage. Behind them, 13 Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters prepared to make the first attack, their job to strafe the convoy and suppress anti-aircraft fire. Above, 16 B-17 Flying Fortresses would bomb from traditional altitude, forcing the Japanese ships to maneuver and break formation. P-38 Lightning fighters would handle any Zeros that showed up. But the killing blow would come from Larner's 9 bombers, skimming the waves with their revolutionary tactic. Radio silence was absolute. One transmission and the Japanese would know they were coming. The 90-minute flight to the Bismarck Sea passed in tense silence, each crew alone with their thoughts. Through his side window, Larner could see nothing but endless ocean, the same view that had witnessed so many failed attacks before. At 0852, smoke appeared on the horizon, black diesel exhaust from 16 ships steaming in perfect formation. 2 columns of transports, 4 ships each, with destroyers screening ahead and on the flanks. Larner counted gun positions on the nearest destroyer, 6 main turrets, dozens of smaller weapons. Everyone would be tracking his approach once they broke the horizon. First contact. At 0857, the Beaufighters struck. Larner watched from 3 miles out as the Australian aircraft dove from the northeast, their 20mm cannons lighting up the morning sky. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns swung toward this threat exactly as planned. While the gunners focused on the diving Beaufighters, they wouldn't see the B-25s coming in low from the west. 30 seconds later, the B-17s appeared at 10,000 feet. Bomb bay doors opened, and the first salvos tumbled toward the convoy. The Japanese ships immediately began evasive maneuvers, hard turns to port and starboard, columns breaking apart, destroyers accelerating to flank speed. Perfect. A maneuvering ship was easier to approach than one holding steady course. Larner descended to 40 feet, his props barely clearing the wave tops. Through his bomb sight, he selected his target, the second transport in the port column, 700 feet long and sitting low in the water, fully loaded with troops and equipment. His bombardier, Staff Sergeant Carl Walls, began calling distances. 4,000 yards, 3,800, 3,600. At 2,000 yards, the destroyer on the convoy's flank spotted them. Larner saw the muzzle flashes, then the shells arcing overhead, too high. The Japanese gunners were used to tracking bombers at altitude. They hadn't adjusted for a target skimming the surface. At 200 yards, Larner opened fire. All 8 machine guns hammered simultaneously, sending streams of tracers across the water. The rounds walked up the transport's side and across the superstructure, shattering glass, sparking off metal, sending men diving for cover. The suppression was working. Anti-aircraft positions fell silent as their crews ducked from the incoming fire. 800 yards? 600? The transport filled Larner's entire windscreen. He could see individual soldiers on deck, some firing rifles futilely at his approaching bomber. Every instinct screamed at him to pull up, to climb away from the wall of steel, rushing toward him at a combined closing speed of 300 miles per hour. 400, 300, release! Larner hit the bomb release. The B-25 lurched upward as 1,000 pounds of high explosive dropped free. Through his peripheral vision, he saw the bomb hit the water, skip once in a perfect arc, an arrow straight toward the transport's hull. He pulled back hard on the yoke and climbed, engines screaming. Behind him, the 5-second fuse counted down. Chaos and destruction. The explosion came as Larner passed 300 feet, the shockwave catching his B-25 and throwing it sideways. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Tom Benz, fought the controls as the bomber bucked like a wild horse. When Larner could finally look back, the transport was already dying, a massive hole blown in its side at the waterline, fire erupting from ruptured fuel tanks, the ship listing heavily to port as thousands of tons of seawater poured in. To his right, Lieutenant Jake Fawcett was pulling up from his own run. Another transport burned, flames climbing its forward mast. To the left, Captain Bill Hayes had just released on a destroyer. The bomb skipped twice and struck below the stern. The explosion lifted the entire rear third of the warship out of the water. When it crashed back down, the destroyer's back was broken. 4 ships hit in the first 90 seconds, but the Japanese were adapting fast. A destroyer on the convoy's far flank turned to present its full broadside, every gun training on the attacking bombers. The barrage was immediate and devastating. Lieutenant Tom Mitchell's B-25 took the brunt of it. The first shell missed by 50 yards, the second by 20. The third didn't miss. Mitchell's bomber simply ceased to exist. The aircraft's own bomb detonated on impact, vaporizing the B-25 in a fireball that sent debris raining across a quarter-mile of ocean. 5 men gone between heartbeats, no parachutes, no survivors, just empty sky where a bomber had been. The remaining B-25s pressed their attacks. Lieutenant Carl Johnson lined up on the convoy's flagship, the largest transport. His approach was textbook, 50 feet, steady course, machine guns blazing. The Japanese threw everything they had at him: 20mm cannons, heavy machine guns, even rifles. The air between bomber and ship turned solid with tracers. Johnson's bomb release was perfect. The weapon skipped once and punched through the transport's hull just forward of the bridge. The delay fuse gave it time to penetrate deep into the ship before detonating. The explosion gutted 3 decks simultaneously. Fire erupted from cargo holds packed with ammunition and fuel drums. Within minutes, the flagship had become a floating crematorium. The price of success. Lieutenant Paul Warren's bomber took hits during its approach run. A Japanese gunner had finally adjusted for the low-altitude attack. 20-millimeter shells ripped through Warren's port wing, fuel streaming from punctured tanks. Warren held his course. 300 yards to go, 200, 150. He released, watched the bomb skip true, then banked hard right as flames erupted from his damaged wing. His co-pilot activated the fire suppression system. The flames died, but the bomber was badly wounded. One engine failing, controls sluggish, fuel gauge dropping toward empty. Warren turned for home, praying the remaining engine would hold. By now, the convoy was in chaos. 6 transports burned or sank. 2 destroyers were going down. The ocean was carpeted with debris and bodies. Men who had jumped from burning ships found the water itself on fire as leaked fuel spread and ignited. The second wave of B-25s arrived as Larner was departing. 9 more bombers from the 90th Bomb Squadron, led by Major Ralph Chelly. They'd watched Larner's attack from 5 miles out. They knew the tactic worked. They also knew the cost. The Japanese were ready now. Every gun in the convoy tracked low. The destroyers had formed a defensive line, their main batteries firing in coordinated volleys. The ocean erupted in columns of water as shells walked toward the approaching bombers. Chelly's formation spread out, each pilot selecting a target from the remaining ships. His own bomb struck a transport already listing from Larner's attack. The explosion accelerated its death. The ship rolled onto its side and went under in less than 2 minutes, taking 200 soldiers with it. Lieutenant Harold Jensen's approach angle was wrong, too shallow, too fast. His bomb skipped 3 times and cleared the target destroyer entirely. Jensen pulled up and circled for another run. The destroyer he'd missed tracked him the entire turn. When Jensen came back for a second pass, they were waiting. The first shell took his port engine. The second hit the cockpit. Jensen's B-25 rolled inverted and crashed into the sea at 300 miles per hour. 2 bombers down, 7 transports sinking, 3 destroyers crippled. The battle had been raging for 8 minutes. The reckoning. Then the Zeros arrived, 18 of them, diving from 12,000 feet. The P-38 escorts were supposed to handle them, but something had gone wrong. Either the Lightnings were outnumbered or the Japanese had committed reserves nobody knew about. Larner's B-25 was nearly defenseless. Low on fuel, low on ammunition, he pushed the throttles forward and dove for the wave tops. 20 feet, 15, props churning spray. The Zeros split their attention between the bombers and the P-38s above. Warren's damaged bomber attracted a Zero like blood draws sharks. The Japanese pilot was patient, skilled. He waited until Warren ran out of airspeed in a climbing turn, then fired a precise burst. Warren's remaining engine exploded. The bomber nosed over and hit the water hard. Larner saw 3 parachutes, 3 survivors out of 5. The Zeros pressed their attack for 6 minutes before abruptly breaking off. The B-17s were returning for another high-altitude run, and the fighters had to choose between targets. They chose to defend what was left of the convoy. Larner used the Respeive to assess the damage. His port engine was running rough, oil pressure fluctuating. Fuel showed 60%, enough to reach Port Moresby if nothing else went wrong. Behind them, the convoy had ceased to exist as an organized force. 8 transports had been hit. 7 were sinking or already gone. The 8th burned while trying to beach itself on the New Britain coast. All 4 screening destroyers were damaged, 2 dead in the water. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea wasn't over. American bombers would return every 6 hours for 3 days, ensuring nothing survived. Of the 7,000 troops who had left Rabaul, fewer than 1/200 would reach Lae, most walking through jungle after swimming ashore. The rest drowned, burned, or died under strafing attacks that would haunt the pilots who flew them. Aftermath and legacy. Larner landed at Port Moresby at 11:17, his damaged bomber barely holding together. The debriefing lasted 2 hours, intelligence officers piecing together the story from exhausted crews. 4 B-25s lost, 20 men dead or missing. But the convoy was gone. General Kenny arrived at 1600, studied the reconnaissance photos in silence, then pointed to the beached transport still burning on the coast. "Finish it," he ordered. No ship could be allowed to reach Lae. None. The implications rippled across the Pacific. Within days, the Japanese Navy canceled all large convoy operations within range of Allied land-based aircraft. The supply lines to their forward bases were severed. Without reinforcements, without supplies, the island garrisons began their slow starvation. Skip bombing had worked, but at a cost. The technique would be refined, taught to every bomber squadron in the Pacific. Within 6 months, it became standard doctrine. The British adopted it for attacks on German convoys off Norway. The Soviets tried it in the Baltic with mixed results. But for the men who flew that first mission, the memory was more complex than any tactical assessment. They had proven that bombers could sink ships by skimming the waves and bouncing bombs like stones. They had also learned the price, watching friends disappear in fireballs, feeling shrapnel rip through aluminum skin, nursing damaged aircraft home while wounded crewmates bled in the fuselage behind them. Major Ed Larner flew 16 more missions before rotating home in May 1943. He never flew skip bombing again. When asked why, he would only say that some things a man could do only once. He trained other crews in the technique, watched them take off on missions, watched some never return. The mathematics were brutal, but undeniable. Skip bombing was 15 times more effective than high-altitude attacks, but it killed the men who flew it at 3 times the rate. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea changed the Pacific War. It proved that aircraft could strangle sea lanes, that innovation could overcome tradition, that courage measured in steady hands at 50 feet could reshape strategy across an entire theater. But for the men who flew those missions, skimming between ocean swells and anti-aircraft shells, it would always be something more personal. The morning they rewrote the rules of warfare by refusing to accept the mathematics of failure. The final account. Larner survived the war, but skip bombing had marked him in ways that would never fully heal. He requested transfer to transport aircraft after his tour ended, spending the remainder of the conflict flying C-47s. No combat, no more watching crews he'd trained die using techniques he'd helped perfect. When offered promotion to lieutenant colonel, he declined twice before finally accepting. Recognition meant nothing against the weight of empty bunks in the squadron quarters. The Japanese would later call the Battle of the Bismarck Sea their most perfect disaster, a convoy destroyed so completely that it redefined their entire strategic approach. Admiral Yamamoto himself wrote that the loss revealed the nakedness of our position in the Pacific. Without the ability to reinforce by sea, Japan's island empire began its inevitable contraction. Skip bombing peaked during the November 1943 raid on Rabaul Harbor, when 38 B-25s sank or damaged 18 warships in 18 minutes. By then, the technique had evolved. Coordinated attacks with fighters suppressing defenses while bombers came in waves, some high, some low, overwhelming any possible defense. But the essence remained what Larner had proven that March morning. A bomber at wave height, releasing at precisely the right moment, could kill ships with mathematical certainty. The cost never decreased. By war's end, skip bombing units had suffered 29% fatalities among their crews, far higher than strategic bombing, nearly as high as torpedo bomber squadrons. It remained the most dangerous form of attack aviation in the Pacific War. Men did it because it worked, not because it was survivable. Larner died in 1997 in Sacramento, his obituary mentioning military service in a single line. He had requested no military funeral, no mention of decorations, no details of his contributions to aviation history. His family honored those wishes. The local newspaper never knew that the quiet retiree who fed birds in McKinley Park had revolutionized naval aviation, had led 9 bombers into history on a morning when conventional wisdom said they should all have died. Today, no B-25 that flew at the Bismarck Sea survives. The aircraft were used up, worn out, scrapped for aluminum when peace came. A few restored Mitchells fly at air shows, their polished skin and fresh paint nothing like the salt-corroded, battle-damaged bombers that skimmed the Bismarck Sea. Museums display the type, but not the specific machines that proved a theory could become a revolution. What remains is this. On March 2, 1943, American airmen discovered that the impossible was merely difficult, that innovation could overcome doctrine, that courage could be measured in the decision to hold course when every instinct screamed to turn away. They transformed warfare, not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through the willingness to fly straight at death until death blinked first. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea vanished from public memory, overshadowed by Midway's carrier duels and Guadalcanal's desperate ground combat. But in the mathematics of victory, in the calculus that determines how wars end, those 9 B-25s skimming the waves changed everything. They proved that the sky had become the dominant factor in naval warfare, that ships without air cover were merely targets waiting their turn, that the Pacific would belong to whoever controlled the air above it.